what's up, guys? Um, I wanted to show you how I go about breaking down a SCO slate, how I leverage our projections, the inefficiencies in the Vegas market, and some of just the general rules and settings that I use in the Labs optimizer, as well as how I leverage that to really just kind of open up my mind to unique lineups and things along those lines. So I keep this fairly short, or I'll try to be short. I tend to ramble. So hopefully you guys find this beneficial. I know a handful of you guys have been asking me some questions, so I will address those in this video as well. And I'm using my Apple headset as my mic, so I apologize for the poor quality. Bear with me. It is what it is, but the important stuff. So yeah, I guess the first thing is just to show you how simple it is to take our custom projections and put those over into the Labs optimizer. It is a three-click process, I think. You hit copy, you go over to the Labs optimizer, you hit upload projections, and you paste. So a little bit more than 3 clicks, but you get the idea. It is that simple. You can now see that they've all changed. That's that, like just a couple clicks. You can do a lot. You can leverage that in a bunch of different ways, and you can really expand on how to use that if you want to. You'll notice right here that you have multiple different projection sets that you can filter between. So what's really cool is on the upload tab, there's this template. You can download this template and you can kind of do whatever you want to with this template at this point. Um, if you wanted to run a couple different multipliers and change these floors and ceilings, which you'll notice we'll have some rules for, or you can build for and set rules based on later on in the video. I'll touch on those. But you basically have this template that you can now then re-upload. So I find that super useful. And what's cool is you can have different projections from Excel. And I think that's important too. As much as I think like clicking this for OC and trying to get yourself on floppy, doing that here in the builder, depending on the type of player that you are, if you're just like doing one lineup, three lineup, 10 lineups, like that's probably fine. But when you are starting to multi-enter, you've got 150 or 105 lineups. You're doing 20 different lineups for a 20 max contest. You might be building very unique lineups for a 3 max contest. I think it's better to work in Excel. There's a good chance that if that's you, you don't need this from me anyways. But as people are starting to maybe step up in stakes, working in Excel is really good. Stop building lineups on your phone. I think it's great. Like if you are looking at our projections on the site and you're making one cash lineup, like build from your phone, I think it's totally fine. It's super straightforward and easy to do that. See, I ramble. But this makes it nice to have multiple projection sets to build off of, and you can just toggle in between them without having to like adjust OC to 69, 69 or something like that to get more OC exposure. In Excel, you can have a build that is like Cloud9 heavy. Just one of the ways to go about it. Just really want to show you like a couple of the ways to really use the Labs tool here, which I just have been really impressed by. It's been a really great tool to use. So that's very straightforward, very simple. Really where the fun begins is over in the multi lineups. Now, this is where even if you are a cash game player, you're building one lineup and you are entering that in 20 cents worth of contest, or you're entering that in $20,000 worth of contest. I still think leveraging a lineup optimizer to expand your thought process so you do not get tunnel visioned on a specific player or a specific stack or something like that. I still think you should be in here building. It makes us question our process, and I think that that is good. Not saying that maybe the dummy lineup that you made ends up being the nuts and that's the one that you run with. I think that's great as long as you did the work to get there, and you've kind of questioned your own thought process each and every slate, whether it is a 2-game slate, an 8-game slate, just constantly be putting in the work. It's what I do. It's what some of the top pros do. I'm not a professional by any means. I think when you have $1,000 in volume on the slate, it's not possible to be a professional. But when you guys who have, close to six figures on a CS:GO, do you know how hard it is to get like $40,000 in action down on a CS:GO slate? Um, like it's a cakewalk to get that down on an NFL slate, but it is tough to get that down on a CS:GO slate. So look at those guys in the lobby and study their lineups. I really recommend that you do it. There's a couple of those pros are in our Discord. They've even chimed in a couple times. They're extremely helpful. Like just ask in the Discord too. So, anyways, back to this settings. This video is already longer than I wanted it to be. But the settings, this is where the good stuff is. I'll show you guys some of my general builds. I think it's important to understand that I'm playing roughly 10 lineups max per slate. Occasionally, I will fire into the large $10 or $15. It's like a 105 or a 150 max. I'm not going to really go over those builds. I'm going to focus more on like the 3 max and 5 max and 10 max stuff that I know most people are playing. But the first thing that I'll set my min salary cap to 90. You could go lower if you want to. Just be careful. Make sure you're paying attention. Um, the max salary cap, I'll set to 100%. Max player exposure, I leave it 100. Avoid players on opponent. I cannot tell you how many times on a 4-game slate, on a 3-game slate, on a 6-game slate, I see people playing an opposing player. It is not smart to do. The only reason that you should be doing that is if there's a 2-game slate and there's like 2 massive studs and the rest of the field is like extremely suboptimal. Then I think that's fine. Nico versus um, Zaiwu, for example. I actually think that slate happened not too long ago. I think that was a fine slate to do it. Those are the times when I think it's fine. But dude, like I can go to some of my live lineups right now and I can show you where a guy played Yuri versus Cirque in a 109 head to head. It just, you have to look at your range of outcomes and the correlation of that. And if Yuri is going to do well, it's highly probable that Cirque does not do nearly as well as, say, Quesarado or Art or Vinny or Henny. Especially if Furia just does well. It doesn't add up, especially on like a 4-game slate. I mean, there's so many options. It's just insane to me. So avoid players on opponent. I think is smart. Unique players per one. I leave this to 1. You can set it to 2 if you're doing some more lineups and you just kind of want to see what that variation looks like. Now, this is where range of outcome is. Just be careful with this. I like using it. Sean Williams has modeled our CSGO projections very, very well. We've been extremely accurate relative to the rest of the industry, and when we've R2 scores, we have been very, very accurate. So you can just leave this alone. I like to embrace variance. I think that as profitable of a player as I might have been over the last 3 months, 6 months, 10 months, whatever, I am wrong a lot of the time. Anyone is. We're more than likely going to be wrong about something, especially in Counter-Strike, than we are going to be right. And a lot of that times means embracing that wrong side and being right with the outcome. So I think setting this to something between like 15 and 30 is a great thing to do in a 3 max or in a 20 max build. In 105, crank up the variance. Just set it to 100% or 50%. Change your range of outcomes. Just I think when you're doing those massive builds, I think you definitely should. If you're playing cash, you can set this like 15 or 20%. My default when I'm using this builder is to go to 30%, and that is per player. I do think that you could maybe set this to 0. I don't do this, but I'm totally fine with this, is if you change your captain to say 15% and your flex is a little bit wider of a range of outcomes. You really want to build in that floor at captain in your cash games. You also want a ceiling, I think, as well. Had these conversations with a lot of people, whether it's NFL or MLB or PGA, like you still want to build ceilings into your cash game teams. Building based off of a 3x like we used to in NFL, those days are so dead, it's insane. And I think the same thing with Counter-Strike, right? Obviously, the 3x multiplier does not apply to Counter-Strike. You're definitely looking for a range of like 8, give or take, depending on the contest entry. So, anyways, for me, back to my build. I ranted one again. I probably will do it 2 or 3 more times. 30%. I usually just save my settings as I go tab by tab so I don't forget. Under the team here, this is going to be slate dependent. This is a 4-game slate, so I'll give you examples based off a 4-game slate, and I'll touch on some other ones. But on a 4-game slate, I am really limiting my max to 2. I think a 4-game plus slate, you should be at 2-2-2, 2-2-1-1. Once you start getting into like a 6 or an 8-game slate, I even think that you can go 2-1-1-1, right? The better that a player does, the more likely that so as an example, the easiest way to explain this is if the second guy in market share of kills, let's just say Jacob on 100 Thieves, has a 70-point fantasy day, there's a good chance his team should be pretty correlated with him and they should also have good days. But if he's going to have like a 85-point game, the rest of his team are going to be closer to that like 65 and below mark, in general, because he has really consumed most of those kills. There's only so many kills that can go around. So that's where I think if you can nail in larger fields, if you can nail that one guy and you can do that 2 or 3 times, like you're really setting that ceiling on your large field entry contest. So, but once again, make sure you don't have opposing players. Depending on the slate size, this can be anywhere between 3 to 2. I wouldn't set it to 1. When you start getting to those gnarly like 8-game slates, you can look at 1-1-1s, 1-1. But that's for like large field. You better have like 80 plus entries into something in order to do something like that. So that's really what I'll do for this, just as like a first test. You can come back in here and add some rules, and you can say like, okay, but I always want at least 2 players from Cloud9 and from OG and from EG. And that way you can get some ones from the others. So that's one way to just kind of start messing around with your stacking rules here. Under the player rule, I don't do a lot for this. I don't really set a whole lot of correlations. I don't think it's necessary when you have those stacking rules in. Our projections will lead to those correlations naturally. But there is one thing that you can do that I do like, and this is where it really comes into handy. Under, or excuse me, under the teams here, what if you want to say, okay, I know that big is going to be pretty chalky today. And so I want to be overweight on the field on them, which is fine. Take a stance. So if you're going to be over the weight on big, I think that's great. But maybe you need to be unique in that lineup with somebody like Genji or OG or Evil Geniuses. So back to the player tab here. We can say when in lineups clued, and you can just say like, okay, I really like Henny today. Our projections really like Henny. So if they include Henny and Captain or Flex, I need to make sure that I have at least one of, and this is where you can choose somebody from Gen G or from one of those lower projected teams in regards to ownership, right? So for me, that would be EG, and I can just do like, okay, make sure that it's, not Cirque Captain, but make sure that it's Cirque and Breezy, and let's just go with Ethan for like the 3 guys who have the larger mark of kills on that team. Now, as long as Henny's in my lineup, whether in flex or a captain, it will have I forgot that these guys were playing one another. You understand the example that I was trying to make? So let me go back to um, the Gen G guys. This just so you can actually see the example. The point of this is making sure that you have some low owned guys in some of those more chalky lineups, because it's okay to have chalk in your lineups. It's totally fine. We see it all the time. but you definitely still need to be unique somewhere else. Go study some of those results. Go look at some of the previous winners. It's totally fine to have a captain who was 19% owned, but I guarantee you they had a 9% Liaz, and a 13% automatic, or a 9% automatic, whatever. You understand the point that I'm trying to make. So these are the guys that our projections like from Gen G. So these are the guys that I'm going to include in this rule. And it's as simple as that. So now, when I have Henny in my lineup, I'm guaranteed to have these guys too. Play with those rules, play with those builds, etc. Custom, I don't do anything here unless it's 100 plus entries. And the one rule that I will do is to, at most, one player where the projected points is less than, and I'll go look at the player pool, and let's just say it's like 52.5. Basically, what I'm saying is, like, I'm fine having one of those guys who is in like the third or fourth market share of team kills, but I only want one per lineup, because they'll just really start to sink your lineup as like the value starts to seep in across 150 different lineups. So I think that's one way to do that, but I don't do that for my normal build, so we'll remove that. Let's save our settings, and let's generate 25 lineups. And there you have it. We now have our lineups. And from here, I just think it's important to like look these over, look at the projected points, look at, is there like a random dog, like an underdog where you see like Kusta here, like something like this. I think you can just start to cross off your list if you're playing in a cash, like cash game, one lineup. But as you continue looking them over, it's like, you know what, something like this looks really nice for cash. I think this has a great floor. It's got a favorite in the captain who has a very good ceiling. Nevera is a fantastic value play. We've paired our captain with another flex. And this, to me, right here, is just like, I could totally, I would literally not argue a single thing on that. I'm a big fan of Saracen today, but like, that's fine. Remember, once again, about getting tunnel visioned on a player. Sometimes you need to open and expand, or you can just be super stubborn. And I do this more times than not. I'm like, no, let me see 25 lineups with Searson in the flex. So I'm going to lock them. I'm going to go back to multi lineups, and I'm going to generate 25 lineups. You can see right here, 100% Searson. Now everything is Searson. You can do that through like a player rule too, if you don't want 100%, but you want to make sure you're getting a lot of Searson. But this just really allows you to start looking at a multitude of lineups versus just going to DraftKings and looking at player salaries and being like, I know I like Furia, I know I like Cloud9, bang, 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 bang. And then you get tunneled into these four players when maybe you should have been considering more big or something along those lines. So it's just, it really helps you look at the overall player pool. So I think that's really it for kind of my settings and just looking at it. The multi lineups or my lineups is really great. You can select a file, and you can upload your DK entries, and you can start to save some of these lineups. You can see where I have save lineups here. I can even tag this lineup. I can shift these lineups around. There's a lot of different things that I can do right here within these features. And this would be for like specific builds and uploading and things along those lines. But it makes it really, really nice to be able to do that. So if I tag this, I can tag this one lineup, and I can just tag it as like a cash build. I can tag 3 different lineups as like a GPP build. So there's a lot of different things that I can do. And then let's just say tag, 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 save my lineups. And now you have these saved lineups, and you can start assigning these lineups to different entries that you have, that because you've uploaded your day entries, you can download those files and upload to DK just like that. And now you've changed your entire CSV in your upload. So really beneficial, really easy way to make sure that your lineups are how you want them, accurate. It's just a really, really nice way to manage your lineups. Probably one of my favorite ways to manage your lineups is right here in the multi lineups, or excuse me, my lineups. And what's really cool is you can see how overweight or heavy you are on a set of specific captains or flexes or something like that. And then you can also see how much money you have on a specific player. And you're like, okay, $700 on Xantares today. I really like Xantares. That's probably too much out of $1,000 in entries, right? Let me go see how I can reshift some of this. And maybe it was because I played a bunch of cash that day and I only made 10 lineups for the $33. Well, it's going to be what it is. I'm going to have, 70% of that just in cash because I had Xantares, something along those lines. And that's fine, but if it's a bunch of multi-entry stuff, at least it shows you where you're super exposed. Okay. So now that we've got a decent idea of or a foundation of kind of just how to use the optimizer and its um, very elementary workings, if you will, in regards to where to begin, I think it's super important to identify a player pool. The first way that I do that is honestly just by looking at our projections. So I have them uploaded into Labs, so I can kind of just stay right here within Labs, and I will just start taking a peek. Um, a lot of this stuff too just comes naturally from watching the games or just being involved in Counter Strike and really knowing what's going on. But you can see also, remember my point on uploading your projections? Remember how I changed OC? He wasn't at this. And that's why I think it's important to do it in Excel, not here, because you will continue to build and forget that you've done something here. It happens all the time. So let me go back and just grab OC. Doesn't exist. There he is, 63 points. Um, and let's pop his original projection back in there. So now that we've got OC back in there, I will start to just kind of look at this and look at a player pool and make some mental notes of awesome. We love Yuri, we love Searson, we have Nico projected well. I think this is a pretty tough ask though, considering they are a slight dog. Big has been playing very, very well. The recent form has been fantastic. FaZe's recent form has been super wishy-washy. So really not a main player for me. And I just kind of start going down, and then you'll eventually get to a point where you're just like, yeah, whatever. And you really kind of stick around this core of players that are projecting well. And then I think it's important to go look at Vegas and take a look and see what Vegas thinks about a game. I think that the market for Counter Strike is wildly inefficient relative to the big markets like the NFL and MLB. And I do think that that is why you can exploit ownership in Counter Strike uh, to a much larger extent than some of the other big sports. People just really haven't caught up to that yet. And so this slate that we have here is going to be a little bit unique. So I'm going to use some drastic examples. But what I'll do is I'll take our site projections here. I already have them downloaded. I'll just do some conditional formatting because it makes it easier on my eyes. And I will start to look at the percent chance to win, which we have built right into the projections, versus a player's projected points. And we can start to see some clear outliers right here in Heretics. You can see that, yes, they are pretty much a pick 'em to win, but they project really, really good. So maybe their ownership is a little bit suppressed, but I wouldn't expect it to be drastic. And that's what I'm saying. Like this slate was unique. And if you go back and you look at this slate, you'll see that ownership was all over the place. I mean, there were Furia players who, in some of my, $25 and $50 five mans, were 20. I was the only person to own a Furia player, which I just thought was insane. Maybe I was wrong on Furia. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. That ownership is nuts. So the ownership was all over the place for this slate. But in general, what I've noticed is that ownership follows the Vegas implied win percentages. So if a team is minus 400, and that's the highest money line, they're the largest favorite on the slate. The players from that game will most likely be the highest owned players on the slate. Um, when teams are at a relatively, like it's a pick 'em or like a minus 125 and even money, the ownership tends to be a little bit spread out between them. So you can really take advantage of players who project well, but are still a favorite or are or it's as close to a pick 'em as you can get. And we know that Counter Strike is all over the place. Um, we've seen underdogs of plus 50 just reverse sweep teams after losing the first match, like, or even just 2-0 cleaning them, right? So I think that the market is wildly inefficient. Live betting games, if you're sitting around, take a look at some of the live spreads. You'll see what I'm talking about. It's out of control. uh, so for identifying ownership in larger fields, I really do just rely on Vegas right now. Me and Sean are working on getting you guys a projected ownership. We just want to try and get some more accurate numbers before we really give it to you. So we've just been doing a lot of our own internal testing first, but hopefully we'll have that soon. For now, just look at Vegas. We saw it today with FaZe. They were a dog. Their ownership was so low. I mean, it was insane. Um, so I think it was crazy to get Nico at 18% in the 33. Didn't pan out, but you could it to my point, them being one of the bigger dogs on the slate, they had some of the lowest ownership. Every single Gen G player in the $33 was sub 10%. Every single Gen G player in the 222 and the $222 sub 10%. Um, so like just proving people are following these Vegas ownerships. They're following the Vegas money lines, and they correlate very highly to ownership. So just another way of starting to identify players. For me today, I took a look at our projected points, as well as the market share of kills for this Heretics team, who are a pretty talented team, and they got smoked by OG today. So it didn't pan out, but um, they projected well, and their ownership was actually kind of high. And I think that's because of how well they projected from a point perspective, as well as not being a massive dog. So that's where we saw a little bit more of that flatter ownership, is where OG ownership is all like sub 10%, which was just insane. So there's a little bit of a flip there, but you can see how different these players project versus the OG players right here. From there, like I said, this slate is just kind of a super tough example, but the big guys carried a lot of ownership at big favorite, and uh, the two higher guys, Floppy and OC, tended to carry a little bit of higher owner from C9. So super easy to realize who's going to be higher owned than most. And so you can go Floppy and OC, and then you could go, Breezy or Nico, right? It's super easy to like get on some chalk, some guys who project really well, and then also use a guy like Nico who projects really well, but will have low ownership. Didn't pan out today, but doesn't mean it won't work tomorrow. And that's what we have to do in large field stuff, is take some, uh, you know, well calculated risk. And I believe that's exactly what that is. So using Vegas, I think is important for identifying a player pool. And then, guys, using HLTV is just you've got to be living in here. I think that's not true. I don't think you have to. I think if you really want to start understanding teams and players, going to HLTV, there's so much data in here. I can't stress enough how important recent performance is. Um, and this is where you can start to see, even if you were on vacation the last 2 weeks, or you're new to Counter-Strike and you want to see how a team is performing, just hop in here. Let's go take a look at this Cloud9 versus Gen G game. And you can start seeing some underlying stats right here, their kills per round. All of this is factored into our projections, as well as a lot of other different data points, but this is some stuff that's factored in. This analytics center right here is awesome, especially if you're betting on the matches. You can come in here and you can start seeing, okay, taking a look at their most recent five. Wow, Gen G, that is a tough schedule. Furia, EG, Liquid, those are all very, very good North American teams. And they got absolutely smoked based off of a tough schedule. Cloud9, okay, close game versus MIBR, or was it close? Let's take a peek. Let's look in. 16-12, 16-8, 16-9. It was not a close game. MIBR smoked them those last two maps. So you can see it's super easy to click around in here and see context around some of these players. Yeah, and New England Whalers. Now, I know this is like some of the lowest tier Counter-Strike tier 3 teams that you could be playing against. And they smoked them. I mean, it was like 16-10, and then this overtime was insane. And that, look at this, 25-22. That's a triple overtime game, and OC at 81-39. Plus 42 for those two matches. That is nuts. But having context, knowing that it went to overtime and that this is a low tier Counter-Strike team and that they only lost this by, now I would say that like this is Cloud9 doing a very good job doing what they should against a low tier team. But like an OT and a semi-close game, I just think context is important around looking through their recent performance, and you can even see that that is factored in. Like, look at their 3-week performance. Um, their recent form is Gen G is So this game might be a little bit closer than not only Vegas thinks, but I think the rest of the industry thinks. So maybe you start to get onto Gen G just a little bit. You use Big, you use Furia, and then you have two Gen G one-offs, and you now have a pretty damn unique lineup. Especially if you get a little bit more unique with Furia. Yuri was drastically underpriced today. His ownership is going to be one of the larger ownerships on Furia. So pivot to Henny. Pivot to Quesarado and Henny and just X Uria. You now have one of the better teams on the slate with one of the better with one of the better minds, and you've made a pivot off of one of the higher owned guys to his two teammates. It shakes out like that all the time. John George took down the 180 yesterday. He used Liaz from 100 Thieves, who had a fantastic day. He didn't get cute and stack an underdog. He stacked a he stacked a minus 700 favorite. He just used a different guy on the team. Liaz was like 8%. It's out of control. So you can make easy pivots that way. Counter-Strike is extremely volatile, guys. So while our projections are good, you can see there are a lot of different pieces to the puzzle, as there is in any sport. You cannot just upload the industry's best projections over at 4for4, or you cannot just use Sean Corner's industry best projections at Fantasy Labs and upload them and hit optimize and expect to win. It does not work that way. You need context, you need multiple pieces to lineup construction, and those pieces of that puzzle will change slate by slate by slate by slate. Every single slate takes work. Every single slate is going to take some thought. Don't get me wrong, there's going to be a slate. We've seen a few recently. Click, 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 click. I'm done. Like it can be that easy sometimes, but you should still put in the work to just confirm that. So yeah, I think looking at HLTV, and then what I also really like to do is under the teams tab. So if we go back to Cloud9, we can start taking a look at some of their market share of kills, and we can do that by just going and looking at a 3-month players, and we can start seeing who really has some of the larger market share of kills. Like look at OC and Floppy, just leagues above. That's 99% of the time reflected in pricing and projections, but sometimes it's not. Issa is a great example of that. On OG, he was severely underpriced today for his market share of kills on that team. So like come in here and take a look. Sometimes you'll see, and I'll show you an example on EG or on Furia, why that like Quesarado Henny pivot works wonders off of using Uria. Even though that those two are more expensive, just find a pivot somewhere else. Play Modem and Floppy instead of OC and um, and floppy, right? Like just take a salary saving on a guy who has a decent shot at going positive in the game. I also think it's important to flip between 1 month here and take a look at how some of that kill differential might have shifted. So you can see like Motum is that. Maybe you don't want anything to do with Motum. So looking at recent form is super important. Um, and I'll show you with Furia and EG. Look at that. EG, an underdog, having a little bit of a lead against Furia here. Probably CT-sided nuke. Yep, that makes sense. So I just knew that they were on nuke, and I knew that that's why they were winning. I watched too much of this game. What was I doing? Oh, going to Furia's team page under stats, under all stats for Furia, under players, and last month. You can see here, look at Henny and Quesarado. Look at how grouped this market share kills is over the last month. Let's take a look at the last 3 months. Look at, oh my gosh, look at the grouping there. That is insane. So like, if you know that Uria is going to be 50% owned in a 500-person contest, and you know that Henny is going to be 35% owned, and you know that Quesarado is going to be 35% owned, you should fade Uria every single time. Every single time. Every single time you fade Uria. That is how exploiting ownership works, especially in this, like, this is as clear of a situation as it can get. You should be fading Uria every single time. It does not matter. And that will be a profitable play. Like, I'm not saying that it's going to be profitable every single time, but over 10 slates, 15 slates of that exact same situation panning out, that is beyond profitable, based off those ownerships. Even at a 20% discount, it's massive. So I think that gives you a general idea of what I do to start looking at a slate. And then from there, it's all about just building well-balanced, good lineups, making sure that you're rostering good players, making sure that you're, if you're punting with a guy, make sure that that player at least has a decent amount of market share of kills on his team. Look at an Art or a Vinny, look at a Modem, look at a favorite, or if they're a dog, make sure that you're rostering a guy who is top 1 or top 2 in market share of kills, because they're already at a dog, so technically they're already at a disadvantage, even though I've said a million different times how inefficient the market is in Counter-Strike. But yeah, I think that gives you a good idea of how I go about my slate. Slate size definitely varies. One of the questions that I got was how the size of a slate changes how you build your teams. At a foundational standpoint, it doesn't, other than the stacks. The smaller the slate, the more willing I am to use 3 from one team. The larger the slate, the less likely I am to use 3 from one team. Once you get into 4+ slates, you shouldn't have 3 players on a team. I just don't think it's necessary. But that will also be slate dependent. If there is a team who is like a -1,000 favorite, so we're seeing like a tier 1 team, a top 10 team in the world, versus a bunch of players who like are grinding Counter-Strike, and they're the top 80th ranked team in the world. I think using 3 is viable, especially if those 3 are, let's say it's like Nico, FaZe, and Brokey, or excuse me, Nico, coldzera, and Brokey, where that market share of kills are pretty condensed between those 3, or at least between Brokey and coldzera, then I think something like that is fine. So it's slate dependent too. I can't say this enough. Everything is unique to the slate. Everything needs to be processed based on how that slate's pricing is, what teams are on that slate. There's just so much that goes into it. So that was one of the questions. Another questions are, what are some of the factors you take into account when making your captain pool? Do you look to cut limits at the captain exposure and try to gain leverage on the field? or do you say look for players with the best ceilings? Definitely the latter. Best ceilings for sure. I'm usually not overly concerned with my captain percentage because I think you can be unique in other situations. I've said that a couple different times throughout the video. I do like, once again, slate dependent. If a player is projecting for like 35+% in the captain and they're a good pivot, I could absolutely, right? Like I absolutely think that you can take a chance and just put that player in the flex and be unique that way. Um, and what I mean by that player, the player who projects for 35% in the captain, take him out of the captain, put him in the flex. So you still have that player who's good, but if you get a 9 point difference between your two captain spots, like that's a massive win at a lower ownership. Um, I think those were probably the two best questions that I got. But hop in the Discord, keep asking away. I've been answering a ton of stuff in the Discord. So is everyone else in the Discord. Everyone's helping me out. So yeah, I think that is it for me. I plan to do some more of these, evergreen type videos. This was lengthy. I apologize if you're here with me till the end. I appreciate it. But yeah, hit me up on Twitter at Ryan Hodge if you have any questions, or get at me in the Discord.